All right, George Washington visits and fights in the Garden State. What led me to this? He asked a question before, why George Washington? Everybody knows him, right? Here's my question for you. How many remember in grade school the picture of George Washington next to Franklin Delano Roosevelt? No, actually, he was always on. Yeah. Now, here's the second part of the question. Is he still there? Is it politically correct? Well, what's happened is they removed him a large part because he owned enslaved people. Turns out that's not always quite the truth either. But look at this map. This is a map made in Europe by the Hessian soldiers. Look what's on it if you can. I don't know, I don't have a clicker thing, but if you look at it, you will see John Ogden, big family, and you will also see Chatham down here, Boontown, Morristown, and this was made in about 1760, 50. Now, look also very closely at the little red things. See the little red things? Those are readouts. This is a map of every single fort in northern New Jersey, just a piece of the map. And there's, on the other side of the map going this way, there's Livingston, and there's also Log Jail, which is Johnsonburg, and Old Courthouse, which is Newton. And they had it all mapped out. So I'll try this one more time. So how did I get started with this? This is the picture we all see. Remember that as a kid? Had a Pledge Allegiance and all that stuff. Well, if you look at his cheeks, they're stuffed with napkins because he had, at this point, after the presidency, he had no teeth. So what he would do is stuff his mouth with napkins so his face would collapse. And he was vain. He's an interesting man. And I want to talk tonight about stuff you may not know. I'm not really interested in battles and that. Now, this is Tubby's Hook in Inwood, Manhattan. Now, Tubby's Hook is where I played as a kid. It's right on the Hudson River on Dyckman Street, 200th Street. And it was a Revolutionary War settlement. He may have ridden through or not, but I used to sleigh ride on Fort George Hill, was the battle off Broadway. I'd sleigh ride down it. Fort Washington was up at the top, and the neighborhood was very focused on being Washington Heights. Inwood, it was called, or Tubby's Hook, which I thought was great. I can show you a picture. This is, there we go. That's the Black Horse Tavern, which was in Tubby's Hook. And basically, you wonder when you're looking about George Washington, where did he sleep? Where did he get food? Where did he, what happened to his personal life? Is anybody aware that Martha was with him at Valley Forge? And so let's take a look at, this is Tubby's Hook today. And if you look at the coastline, that was the end of Dyckman Street. And the game there was to go down and get a handful of rocks and throw them at the rats. What are you going to do today, Billy? I'm going to go slug rats down by the river. And that is known not as Tubby's Hook, but down by the river. I'm going down the river, like you go down the shore. And anyway, with that said, that's where my interest started, because this is what the neighborhood looks like today. There is a replica of a Hessian hut, because the Hessian huts went from 181st Street all the way up Manhattan. And they were there for the winter, and those Hessians weren't stupid. They had 4 men to a hut with a fireplace, and they did the archaeology back in early 1900s and discovered that there was horse bones in the fireplaces. Because if a horse died, they ate them. And if you look there in the lower left-hand corner is the Dyckman House, which is still there, Revolutionary War farmhouse. Washington was never there. But if you go today, the Hessian hut's behind it. And if you look up the hill, you see the cloisters. Anybody here been to the cloisters? Well worth the trip. Bridge, okay. You make a left on Port Washington Avenue, and you pull in to medieval cloister brought over by John Rockefeller. To school in the Dykeman Valley, and we were emphasized to study George Washington. And I'll tell you something, I played George Washington when I was in fourth grade, second grade class. That was very much part of our history. And also the group that I was with, the educational process then was such that we were being advanced. So we spent a lot of time studying George. But let's take a look at that. This is George and Martha Washington's private lives during the American Revolution. Now, if you look at him on the left, he started out as a surveyor. An interesting thing about him, he was 6'2" and very, very strong. There's a tale that says two men were fighting. He rode in, picked them up from horseback, each one by the collar, and lifted them off the ground. It's a strong man. But what did we learn in school? Let's see. We learned that he told his father, "I cannot tell a lie," after he chopped down the cherry tree. He also is credited with throwing $1 across the Potomac River. Remember all of that? I cannot tell a lie. Well, the father actually, it was made up by Parson Weems. Parson Weems wrote, as you see his picture there on the left, wrote a 85-page pamphlet, including all these stories. And we have very little about George Washington's life, except he was an inveterate letter writer. He wrote letter after letter. You haven't got enough time in a couple of months to read all his letters. And Washington Irving, the same one who wrote Sleepy Hollow, Legend of Sleepy Hollow, wrote a 10-volume biography here in Morristown about Washington. What does he leave out of that biography? Morristown. He says he was in Morristown. That's all we read. So let's take a little further. These are all the portraits from Irving's book, The Different Look of George Washington. And he seems to, this is the younger one on the lower left, and on your see the change in his look. And there's a couple of reasons for it that I've noticed. Or is he, when he was a young man, he was 19 years old. He went to Barbados to visit his stepbrother and caught smallpox. They think that more on this later, they think the drug they gave him cost him his teeth. And at 19, so I think he lost his last tooth when he was 24. And he did not powder his hair. He had reddish hair, didn't wear a wig, wore long hair, as was the custom at that point. And by the way, thing too, Washington left school when he was 11. He was totally not educated, and but his writing is like, oh, schools have changed. This is the map of New Jersey, and why do we have it here? Well, during New Jersey, and I looked this up, is I'm trying to think of how many square acres it is. There are 162 towns and villages where George Washington visited inside of 3 or 4 years. From one end of the state to the other is quite a way. I think it's 166 square miles or something like that. That's about it. And he did it all on horseback. I was very curious. Now, maybe you all know this, maybe you do not. But when the British invade and land, they land is now Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. And they brought the Hessian troops who were stationed on Staten Island. So when Washington faces the British, he gets really in trouble. They lose the battle terribly. And they're running up through Brooklyn. And they until they land up in my old neighborhood there. Why there? Because Inwood has one of the highest points in the island. And then if you go across the island, there's another high point, and you could put your soldiers there. And it was a good viewpoint, but the British were still coming. So the British, the problem with them was communication. The Hessians spoke German. The British had one general who spoke a little German. That was it. So nobody knew what was going on. And the Germans said, look, they're military trained. Remember, the British, if you remember, buy their commission. They purchase it. So you want to be a lieutenant, you get daddy to give some money to, and you're a lieutenant. Germans, meanwhile, the Hessian soldiers got in at age 13. They enlisted and went to military school and progressed by their achievements or their accomplishments. So they told, as best they could, the British, look, keep chasing this guy. He's on the run. We'll end the revolution here. Oh, no, no, said the British. We don't want to do that. We want to flank them. Well, to flank, flanking go around the outside. Well, to do that, they had to go up into the Bronx, cross Kingsbridge Road, and they never did. The Germans thought it was a great idea. We get around his flank. Meanwhile, Washington has enough time to the river at Fort Lee and come out here. This is called Newbridge Landing.
Yep.
And Newbridge Landing, and that house is still there. He comes through Fort Lee and heads south. And here's the list of battles he fought. Everybody sees Washington at the head of the revolutionary troops. Battle of Trenton. He fought in January, also the Princeton, Assunpink Creek, and Battle of White Plains is kind of crossed the border in the Battle of Monmouth. Meanwhile, he won at Trenton. On the way, now this is another legend we all know and love so well. There was a 3 times divorced upholsterer who supposedly made the flag, Betsy Ross. Now, Betsy was a swinger, so we're not too sure what was going on there. She was a swinger. They think she was one of Washington's female spies. And they think that the Hessian, we can't prove this, the Hessian General von Donop was shacked up with her while Washington was tracking Trenton. I always think that's pretty funny because the commander at Trenton's yelling for help and, oh no, I'm not coming. I'm not doing it. See you. And supposedly that's the flag she made. Keep your eye on the grand old flag. Here is, you all know this picture? It's done by a German named Edmund Leutze. It's about as big as that. It's huge. There's some puzzles attached. Number one, he's not crossing the Delaware. It was painted in Düsseldorf.
The Rhine.
Right. He's crossing the Rhine. And in the back, you can see Düsseldorf. And here's the other question. The boats they use held 40 men. But why is there a woman, a Scot, and a black man behind him? And look at the flag. It's the wrong one. Didn't happen until, much later. But Leutze was obsessed with Washington, as were the Germans. So that when they got von Steuben over here, they knew well who he was. Von Steuben's a story for another time. So he goes to Trenton. This is the artist's imagination. The reality of it was they were spying on Trenton forever. They did not kill the drunken Germans. They were not drinking because it was Christmas Eve. All the soldiers were told to go to bed with their rifles. They expected an attack. Von Roll tells them, we were expecting this attack. There had been intermittent attacks up until the battle on Christmas Eve. And so they kept writing to the British generals saying, look, we need some help here. Oh, no, what are the rebels going to do? After all, they did was capture a cannon or two, and nobody got hurt. Well, that's what they were doing, stealing cannons. And so they came in, 40 men to a boat, Conky's Ferry, and cross that way. They come in, and because it's raining and sleeting, all the guns froze. They could not fire the guns. And these are boys. These are 17, 18-year-old boys. So 950 Hessians are captured. And the Duke, to whom they were worth more dead than alive, said they should have fought to the death. And 2 years later, has a court-martial, the captured Hessian soldiers. And they convict von Roll and von Donop were both dead at that point, so it didn't much matter. Von Roll's buried down there, but Dunlop lost his life at Boundbrook, where they have just found 15 Hessian skeletons from the Revolution. Now they're trying to figure out DNA, who they are. So this is the Trenton battlefield. Here's Washington heroically on horseback. How did the horses get there? In the boat? I always wondered that. I wonder stuff like that. And he had 3 horses. One was, wait till you see the names of the horses. We'll get onto that in a minute. He had 3 horses. He was an animal lover. So this is a map, hand-drawn map by the Hessians or the whoever, but all around that he put pickets all the way around the town and captured quite a few. If he had lost this battle, we all have British accent. Seriously, because he just, the men wanted to go home. Their enlistment was up. It was raining. It was stinky. They were living at Valley Forge. So, yeah. So he's going to head north. It's finished with Trenton. He does go to the Battle of Princeton, but then he marches up through Princeton, Kingston, Greekstown, which I understand is still there. Anybody know where Greek? Yes,
I do.
Where is Greekstown?
It's down by like Montgomery, like Hillsborough area, south of that.
So I thought Central Jersey.
Yeah.
Well, it's not to be confused with Slabtown. Slabtown.
That one I don't know.
I always wondered when they make slabs, I really had a problem. But anyway, he's marching north. It was a 4-day march, and he ends up, it comes through Somerville, Bedminster, Bernardsville, Basking Ridge, Harding Township, and Morristown, where he settles. That's when he gets up to this way. Now, if you go to Hackettstown, Main Street, you'll see this tiny little plaque on a tenant named Robert Wilson. He's a friend of the Washingtons. So George came up to Hackettstown Main Street for dinner and to stay over. That's how he got fed. He kept staying over with people. You're photographing that? I can send you a copy.
Yeah, I like it.
What?
I'm just curious, just like, so to recreate it, to see where.
Well, it's an interesting thing. You got to figure that. I figured this. How did he get here? What route did he take from Morristown? Well, Route 46, which wasn't Route 46 quite yet.
Right.
And he and Martha would stop there and they would dinner and stay over. One of the interesting things, and there's 2 places I couldn't get a slide. One, I couldn't get to Randolph. It's all over Randolph, New Jersey. If you go there, Randolph is named after Hartshorne Fitz Randolph. It's on the way to here. Hartshorne Fitz Randolph was married. His wife was Martha Washington's cousin. Now he's a Quaker friend. The Quakers were there in Mendham, and he goes out there to the farm. All that's left is the spring house in Mine Hill. If you go to Mine Hill, New Jersey, Randolph Avenue goes this way and runs into Randolph Avenue that goes that way to the border of the farm. You did that Hartshorne Fitz Randolph was about Quaker and he was there for religious freedom. I found his will. If you borrowed money, 20% interest, loan of 20% interest if you wanted to. And the Quakers have no gravestones. They believe it's a vanity. So we don't know where he's buried. But he goes to Washington's, to Randolph's house. Would you store some munitions for me? Oh, he said, I'm a Quaker. And so the son says, I'll do it. He joined the militia, put the guns in the barn. It's an iron area. I don't know if we know this, but it was iron mines from Mine Hill, Center Grove Road, up to Millbrook Road. I know you did. Do you know where Randolph Avenue meets Randolph Avenue? Did you ever wonder why?
Pardon me?
Did you ever wonder why? You know, on Randolph Avenue is a white spring house.
What?
A white spring house. It's right on the road. And if you go down The hill, that's where Hartshorn Fitz Randolph's plantation was.
By the river.
Yeah. Now wait, the river's a great part of the story. He didn't believe in black slavery. He freed the slaves in New Jersey, 1805. But it was, you had to grow out of it. And also, it was kind of weird because the slaves were free, but the slave hunters from the South could come up here. Now, with that said, Randolph had 3 slaves. Hartshorn Fitz Randolph had a slave, an indentured servant, who would take him to meeting, the meeting house up on Quaker Church Road. And one day it's pouring down rain. And he goes down to the river, and Fitz Randolph says, I want to get on your shoulders across the river. I don't want to get my feet wet. Or so the story goes. And the servant says, sure, but I want a bottle of whiskey. And he says, I can't give you whiskey. I'm a Quaker. He said, tell you what, I'll take you across. I want that bottle of whiskey. Finally gets him to promise the bottle of whiskey. Gets about halfway across, says, now when am I getting my whiskey? He says, never you will get whiskey. So he dumped her and dumped in the river and went home. And have you been in the meeting house? Have you been in the meeting house? Meeting house, the Quaker meeting house. It's on Quaker Church. And for all their religious freedom, women could not worship with the men. And in the graveyards, there's no stones or anything. Anyway, Washington was all over that area because it was a iron area, iron for cannonballs and so forth. In Randolph, where we lived, he came down from Morristown, down Sussex Turnpike, and then he went through Shangam Road. Now, the problem was there was 5 Shangam roads. General had a terrible cold that winter, and Shangam Road, and the newspaper reported that a little 9-year-old girl sleep in her bed with him for warmth. Imagine that as a headline today.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but it was a different time. But he rode across Shangam down Opanaki Road. It's my house, our old house. See that in a minute. But this is the mine that's in Hibernia. He was on his way to Rockaway because all the iron mines are in the Hibernia area. This mine is still there, but it's shut down because of bat fungus, bat flu. You ever heard of that? Yeah. So that's what it looked like earlier on. Now, this is interesting too. This is where they made munitions. This whole area is a munitions area. This is Boonton. Don't go looking for it. Because they made, the story goes to an old Boone, the lieutenant general from the British Army would come by and inspect. And what they were doing is they were making flour on the top floor and cannonballs on the bottom floor. Boonton. 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 You don't say the end, you say Boonton. Now, let me show you what it looks like today. It's under 50 feet of water in the Jersey City reservoir. Yeah. So they claim it's mythical, but it's not. And these stories that I'm telling you, I heard from residents. They're not always published everywhere. Pine Hill, Dick, you guys go playing in the mines?
We're running through the woods. We camp out and running at the nighttime through the woods. They could have fallen in a hole and they never would have found it.
Well, maybe some people at work. Yeah, that was a good thing. Yeah, I know that what, Frank?
If you make a cannonball, you're gonna make a precision size, right, to go in that cannon, because
I'm not a munitions guy.
I'm just wondering how they did that.
Well, you know what do they call those things when they put all the nails and stuff in the tin can? Grape shot.
Oh, yeah.
Grape shot. They'd take leftover scraps, put it in a cylinder, chuck it in the mine. When it went out, it spread flat across the way. And the cannonballs, The only place you can find that out now, I think, is the Kittini Arsenal Museum, which is not open to the public. And when I had to get in there, I had to sign my life away. Because it's a munitions center, but more on that in a minute. This is what became, it was a Samuel Ogden house. And if you looked at Ogden in New Jersey, Ogdensburg, Henry Ogden Ryerson, a very famous family. And it was turned into a larger house by a German or Swiss immigrant, Fesch, in Rockaway, New Jersey. It's right next to Picatinny. And what he did was he was making iron for the troops. And he wanted more men to chop wood. And he writes to Washington and says, can I have more men? And Washington says, I haven't got any men to spare. So he sent some Hessian prisoners. The joke is Fesch was a Hessian. And the letters are in German in Morristown. So, with that said, they were paying them £4.50 a day to chop wood. Can you believe they were using 2,000 cords of wood per day to make the iron in those years? And I'm told the reason you can't get in is because that's one of the major munition centers in the country. So, Picatinny. So anyway, Fesch bought the house from a man named Ford. Now, this was too small, so he moves to Morristown. It's now the Ford Mansion, which became Washington's headquarters. But here is the Hessian Cemetery. This is inside Picatinny. There's 4 Revolutionary soldiers buried there, but who knows? I don't know what I think the Hessians built it, but I also think they were there. However, and this is up in Long Pond, which is now Green Lake. I went on the website, it said closed, forest fires. This is where all the forest fires just were. But it's a great walking trail through there for Revolutionary War stuff. And but not now. So Washington is now in Morristown. There's the statues on the green that he was spending 2 winters there. And it was a good choice in one sense, a bad choice in another. He was there 1777 to about 1779. Martha was with him. And he would go back and forth between Morristown all the way through toward Maine. And then he would go through Jamaica. Jockey Hollow's in Mendham was right next to it. That's where the troops were in Mendham. And he would go into Rockaway and then later on up into New York State because they found out there was an assassination plot to kill him. And he had a lifeguard with him. They caught them and they hung them in Goshen, New York. Yeah, there's a great book, by the way, called Washington's Assassins. And they got them. And this is, has everybody been to the mansion? Washington's headquarters? Yeah, it's in Morristown. It's a beautiful old house. And Washington shows up. That's their master bedroom, he and Martha. There were as many as 30 or more people at the house, including Alexander Hamilton, Marquis de Lafayette. They were all in Morristown. And that's the bedroom. Meanwhile, this, I believe, was Hamilton's room, but he had a cough. That's where I think George caught it. But this was where the men were in Jockey Hollow. The winter had 28 snowstorms, all freezing weather. And these guys were really hungry, starving. They cut out all the trees. If you go to Jockey Hollow, that's all second.
I went through the Jockey Hollow Trail with a trout group.
With the Scout Shore, Tempe Wick House, the Tempe Wick House, your Tempe Wick at Mendham. Anyway, George is there, and the women in Hanover, Whippany, that whole area, made clothing and brought food to these men in the huts. And if you have any kids or grandkids, take them over there in the summer where they have living reenactors. The guy will come out of the woods and say, "Have you seen the gentleman? He owes me money. I get a penny a day. He owes me about $300." So, but it's a great place to take kids too. I gotta go back. Go back to. Meanwhile, this is the office from he worked in Morristown. The tough roads is what really caused the trouble in that winter. It's called The Hard Winter, and there's a film called Hard Winter. But uh, the poor man really suffered. They had a lot of deaths, and you couldn't get around. You don't put snow hoofs, there's no way for the horses to get there. Now, this is an interesting spot. This is where I believe Washington had his whoop shoe. Yeah, you need a thing. I have it. Sucky. I feel your pain. Okay. Anyway, if you look at this house, Washington had his horse shod there. It's right off Opanaki Road. Till when it burned down.
2005.
2005. This was our house, which it's pretty old, and it looked over down a hill. Was a farm. I think one of my favorite farm owners, I looked it up, was Prude's. The Prude family lived there. But it's gone, and now they put $1 million home there. Got rid of the hand-dug well, got rid of all the oak trees, and we couldn't build because we were too close to a brook. But reputedly, when I was out putting a fence up because I had kind of I don't know what you call a neighbor. Don't want to run it down too far. I started digging, and I found the corner next to the hand-dug well, and I found blacksmith's tools. It was Jackson Forge, and it was on the way through Denville. So, this is the Washington's headquarters in the Day Mansion. Can you pause that? You can edit that out, I hope.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Somebody's Peggy's sitting in the thing.
Air conditioner.
I think we both started. This is the Day Mansion in Wayne, which is really worth a trip too. He stayed there after Morristown, and on his way out, it's named today after Mad Anthony Wayne. It's a beautiful facility, and they do have a Washington event there every year. So, but he did. This is right near Willowbrook Mall. This is Mine Hill, the Bridget Smith house. Bridget Smith, Mine Hill. It's right on Randolph Avenue. It's the old house, Revolutionary War house too. And again, in the area, we really don't know where he was. This is Chatham, of all places. Now, Chatham's important. They were trying to convince the British that the Revolutionary forces were going to attack New York City. Chatham's so close, they could come into New York City. They were really heading for Yorktown. They convinced them, and this is, by the way, a restaurant today, but they convinced them that we're headed for New York. Now, we're going to talk about some Washington mysteries. Pretty much, we'll hold the revolution. This is interesting. This is Washington later in life, and he was a Mason. He was a Freemason. Have a look at the back. Nobody seems to know why it's there. It's the Mason pyramid with that eye. his linguistic symbol is a Mason plot. Well, he was a Mason. Most all of our presidents were, I think, except for Lincoln and Obama. I'm not sure. Now, we wonder how he traveled, and he was an animal lover. So he bred the American foxhound, which he is now an AKC breed. He had quite a few of them. He also had a horse named Nelson, another one named Blueskin, and a third one named Prescott. Nelson could handle fire, arms, noise very well. Blueskin didn't like that much. And Prescott's the white horse you always see him on, but he rode it after he was president, when he was president in the White House. Now you'll see the mystery animal on the left will let you think about down there. Now you've all heard the rumor about Washington's teeth. Oh, he had wooden teeth? No, I'll show you what he had. This was his dentist who used Washington's last tooth for marketing. These teeth were made from dead humans, rhinoceros, and enslaved people. He's on record for buying 188 pounds of teeth from enslaved people who sell their teeth. It turns out it wasn't for him. It was a gift. These teeth on exhibit, this one on the far left, they're rhinoceros teeth, and they all have springs in them. So you could close your teeth with the spring. You could lock it later on. The bottom one is gold. And when he was inaugurated, he gave his last tooth to his dentist. And that's why the napkins. The dentist immediately used it in New York. So I took care of the general's teeth and hung it out. And I always thought, yeah, you did a great job. All right, anybody, you may or may not recognize this guy. This is another legend. That's Washington Irving. In the middle is the Headless Horseman. And I believe that the Headless Horseman was not at Sleepy Hollow. He was in Morristown. How about that, huh? Well, Washington Irving was up here to write that 10-volume biography of Washington. He was staying at the Crane House, which is still there. I think it's Acorn Hall in Morristown. And they went to a funeral. And he sees this gravestone, and at the bottom of the gravestone, it says Ichabod Crane. He's curious about that. That doesn't do much, but then when he gets home to Sleepy Hollow, what a great idea to name Ichabod Crane, right? Now, there are 3 legends here in the area. One, that the Headless Horseman had his head shot off in Basking Ridge on an attack. Well, there was an attack, and he's been looking for it ever since. Where does he go? He goes to Devil's Den in Morristown Swamp. That's one. 2, at the Battle of Bound Brook, 2 Hessians get their heads shot off. And when they're buried, they put the wrong heads in the wrong coffin. And they've been looking for their heads ever since. And they found out, they probably found them because a lady reported they just disappeared. Now, this band at the bottom, this is Ichabod Crane. He was a colonel in Elizabeth, New Jersey, actually. And he served in the U.S. Marine Corps, U.S. Army, captain. And he went into the gravestone business. So his name's on the bottom. His son was in the 3rd New Jersey Cavalry Civil War, another Ichabod Crane. However, I've been to Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, and the head of the cemetery insists, puts good money, that Ichabod Crane's from Sleepy Hollow. Believe what you'd like. Now, there's a picture of the Headless Horseman, but the legend is not American, it's German. The German story is a Headless Horseman who had his head cut off with a saber riding through some German forest. And that's where the legend came from. And Washington Irving had been overseas. He lived over there for a while, so And there's the, the concept of Ichabod Crane being chased by, this is Fort Nonsense. Now I gotta connect Fort Nonsense up. They've been to Fort Nonsense in Morristown. It's up behind the courthouse. There's a diagram. You can see it. And a cannon. It's right up as you go in. Well, how does it connect up here? There's that. Over there. It's across the river. Stevens State Park, which was owned by a captain, Peter Salmon, in the American Revolution with the Mount Olive Militia. Well, the farm went, if you can picture this, from Bud Lake all the way up the hill here, almost to the top. Up there, okay. Are they wondering where their husbands are? Well, they're in Morristown. So they get in their horse and buggy and go to Morristown. There, the four guys are building a wall. What are you guys doing? We're building a wall. Said, well, that's nonsense. So today it is still Fort Nonsense connected over there. The Salmon family, and they're not connected, they connected tangentially to Stevens, but they've had a family reunion every year since 1900. And they're connected to the Wooden Iron Works down in this is fun. One of the descendants was a biologist studying plant area. His name was Salmon, and he discovered that it was causing bad reactions, so they named the bacteria Salmonella. There. A lot of history there. There was an Indian village across the way too. Who? This is the who knew section of the presentation. George Washington was the father of the American mule. How about that? Now, mule, I think it's a male. They can't reproduce. I think it's a male horse and a female mule, donkey. Well, he'd been looking while he was here in Morristown for the perfect donkey. He wanted a strong animal because A, they was less feed, and B, they were stronger. So he goes and finds a Spanish donkey. Representative comes to Morristown to meet George Washington and dies when he gets here. Guy drops dead at Morristown. So he's like, oh, okay, what do I do now? So he spent many, many years till he developed what he thought was the perfect donkey. There he is. A particular mule. You'll know the perfect mule, right? You're not the donkey, the mule, which then became the pack animal for the armies. Now here's another thought. What does Cato, the tragedy by Addison, have to do with George Washington? A little known fact, he carried the script in his saddlebags. He was a theater lover. And he and Martha put together the theater at the bakery at Valley Forge. And they had a performance. Now, the Continental Congress had banned all theater because they thought that would detract from the war effort. They did it anyway. And he loved this play, Cato, a Tragedy. And they did it, if you look at the bakery, which is in the middle of the picture, they did it in the old Shakespearean fashion. They did it on the front porch. And one account says they had close to 10,000. There it is. You can see what they would do is they just like put barrels or something and elevate that or sit on the lawn, and they had instant theater. Well, at the end of his life, I don't think anybody should pass away the way George did. He went back home, lived happily with Martha, was very, very happy raising his animals and plants. And the big issue was slavery. They had enslaved people, they were herds. And he knew at some point he got a cold, is what happened. He's lying in his deathbed and he wants the slaves freed. And that's exactly what happened. They got hers and his free before their death. Guaranteed they're free. If he catches a cold, ends up in bed, gets an infection in his epiglottis in the back of his throat. And the doctors, all they had to deal with was bleeding and some kind of a drug which didn't work. He couldn't swallow it. So they took 6 pints of blood out of him. So to save him, and they didn't know any better. And 4 days later, he was gone. He now has the title of Father of Our Country, and he's been represented a lot of times in the films like that. So if you look at who played him in all the different films, this is the gentleman, Chris Jackson from Hamilton. The picture over there is what he looked like. Jeff Daniels, Peter Graves, this guy who did the documentary, his name is Barry Boswick, yeah. And then there's me in the 4th grade in my crepe paper suit with this cocky wig, standing there with buckles on my shoes and told not to move because you're playing a statue. With that, and then here, you have any questions? Anybody? Always good.